Imagine a man seated perfectly still in a high-backed wooden chair in the parlor of his Kentucky farmhouse. A kerosene lamp trembles beside him. On his lap sits not a child, but the severed head of his daughter, her hair neatly brushed, her eyes closed as if in prayer. Witnesses would later claim he stroked her cheek as if soothing her from a nightmare. This is not a fever dream. This was 1880. And the Whitaker family of Henderson County would become the centerpiece of one of the most disturbing mysteries in American rural history, a case so grotesque that newspapers published only fragments, churches disowned it, and the county archives buried it under layers of bureaucratic silence. They called it the Whitaker Illusion. The Whitakers were not wealthy nor destitute. They were middling tobacco farmers, quiet in manner, loyal to their church, and marked by a strange insularity. Family portraits show eyes slightly too wide, smiles too restrained. Yet, beneath that silence ran a legacy of whispers. Stories of daughters born touched by something unnatural, of voices echoing in the house's rafters, of shadows that lingered even when the hearthfire roared. The farmhouse itself was a peculiarity. Built on land rumored to have been an abandoned seminary's graveyard, children claimed they could hear hymns drifting through the floorboards. Adults dismissed it as wind. But the Whitakers never allowed strangers beyond their threshold. Clara Whitaker, age 14, vanished one autumn evening in 1880. Her absence was explained away at first. Perhaps she had fled, perhaps she had drowned in the Green River. Search parties scoured the woods. Neighbors dragged the creeks, but the family remained curiously calm. Too calm. Her father, Josiah, neither begged nor pleaded. He simply said, "She is here. She has always been here." Days later, the sheriff was summoned by a cousin who swore he had glimpsed Clara's hair through the parlor window. What the lawmen found when they entered the farmhouse has since been described as the most unholy domestic tableau ever recorded. The parlor smelled of lamp oil and iron. Curtains drawn tight, crucifixes nailed at odd angles to the walls, as if to pin something invisible in place. There sat Josiah Whitaker, stiff-backed, cradling Clara's severed head. Her expression was serene. Her lips bore a faint half-smile, and Josiah whispered to her as though in conversation. Witnesses claimed he insisted she was not dead, that she still sang in his ear. Some swore they too heard a faint melody, thin and distant, threading the air like the last notes of a hymn. The sheriff ordered him seized, but Josiah did not resist. He simply smiled and said, "Now you've seen her too." Josiah was never put to trial. Within days, records vanish into contradiction. Some accounts say he was hanged by vigilantes. Others that he was institutionalized in a Louisville asylum. And yet, asylum records reveal no Whitaker admitted. Newspaper clippings stop abruptly as if editors were warned off. The corpse of Clara, or what remained, was never recovered. The head itself, evidence, relic, curse, disappeared from the sheriff's office. Henderson County records list the file under removed materials, with no explanation. Thus, the event dissolved into rumor, known locally only as the Illusion. A spectacle witnessed but never explained, remembered but never preserved. Researchers decades later stumbled upon a troubling link. The land deed of the Whitaker farm traces back not to farmers but to the St. Bartholomew Seminary for Girls, an institution shuttered in 1839 after accusations of child neglect, starvation, and whispered rites beneath its chapel. When the seminary collapsed, its orphans scatter, except for one family, a young woman surnamed Whitaker, who curiously vanishes from state records only to reappear as Whitaker. Could Josiah's bloodline have carried something forward from that cursed institution? Or did the land itself imprint its sickness upon the family? Testimony from Whitaker relatives speaks of a peculiar inheritance, the sound of voices where no one stood. Daughters especially reported being summoned at night by hymns sung just beyond their windows. Clara, it was said, had been tormented by these visitations for weeks before her disappearance. She told her mother she no longer trusted the mirror because her reflection sometimes moved before she did. Her mother dismissed it as nerves. But her father, Josiah, encouraged her to listen, to sit in silence and receive. That language would later resurface in asylum patient notes scattered across Kentucky, phrases identical, spoken by men who claimed their daughters sang from beyond. A Louisville newspaper, the Courier Journal, briefly printed an article headlined, "The Singing Head of Henderson County." It described townsfolk who claimed to hear Clara's voice long after her death, particularly when the church bells tolled. But the article was pulled within a day, replaced by a notice that it had been erroneously published. What agency forced its removal remains unknown, yet whispers suggest clerical involvement. After all, several local churches shared ties to the dissolved seminary, and Henderson County's pastors remained conspicuously silent throughout the scandal. Survivors describe the melody Clara allegedly sang, a hymn unfamiliar with words no congregation recognized. A researcher in the 1920s scoured hymnals across America but found no trace. Yet fragments scribbled in witnesses' journals hint at lyrics referencing the father's hand, the daughter's crown. This hymn, or illusion of it, seems to surface cyclically, like a ritual that cannot be erased, only reenacted. Families along the Green River report children humming it in their sleep, though none recall teaching it. Could Clara's illusion be less about madness and more about continuity, an echo that travels through generations? Attempts to locate graves tied to the seminary end in paradox. Maps list a burial ground on the Whitaker acreage. Yet when surveyed in the 1930s, no headstones remained. Locals insist they saw grave markers once, but all were removed overnight. County clerks claim no record of reinterment. The land itself swallows its history whole. A chilling discovery, a single rusted cross unearthed in 1952, inscribed with the letters C.W. Some insist it was Clara's. Others argue it belonged to one of the orphan girls. The truth, perhaps the two were never distinct. One fragmented record survives, found in the margin of an asylum ledger. It reads simply, "Whitaker, the head is the window. Through the window comes the song. Through the song comes the father." What father? Did Josiah mean God himself, or something older, something the seminary girls were forced to sing to in candlelit cellars? The phrase "head as window" would haunt folklorists who noted its resemblance to Appalachian superstitions about skulls serving as conduits for ancestral voices. Descendants of the Whitakers lived quietly into the 20th century. Yet oddities persisted, girls born with faint scars circling their necks, boys who swore their sisters spoke to them in their dreams long after death. Census records show an unusual number of stillbirths. One family Bible contains a page ripped out entirely, leaving only the words "illusion kept." It is as though the family itself became an extension of that parlor scene, forever cradling, forever silenced. No sermon was ever preached on the Whitaker case. Ministers refused interviews. One pastor, anonymously, confided that the hymns heard in the Whitaker house bore uncanny similarity to chants once practiced at the seminary. But when pressed, he recanted, claiming his memory failed him. The church thrives on memory. To deny memory is to deny truth. Their silence was not absence, but protection. Protection for something they feared would unravel their authority if ever spoken aloud. Even now, fishermen on the Green River claim to hear voices beneath the water's surface at dusk, high-pitched, childlike, reciting lines no one can quite make out. Some insist the water itself carries Clara's hymn, that the river is an open mouth repeating what happened in that farmhouse. Those who listen too long report dizziness, hallucinations, or sudden urges to submerge themselves. At least 3 drownings have been attributed to what locals now call the illusion current. In 1961, a photograph emerged from a Henderson estate sale. It showed Josiah in his parlor, chair positioned before the hearth. His lap is blurred, deliberately scratched out with ink, yet faint outlines suggest the oval of a human face. Experts confirmed the photograph's age, but its authenticity remains disputed. What unsettled researchers most were the shadows. Behind Josiah upon the wall, a shape lingers, tall, robed, and faceless, like a priest without features observing. Skeptics dismiss the Whitaker illusion as folklore, an embellished crime recast as supernatural. Yet if it were mere crime, why the vanishing files, why the erased cemetery, why the hymn no one can trace? Folklore comforts us by framing chaos as story, but cover-ups do the opposite. They erase story to enforce silence. What if this case was both? Folklore created because of a cover-up, a community reshaping horror into myth to mask what institutions demanded hidden. Psychologists studying intergenerational trauma argue that events left unspoken do not die, they transmute. Children inherit not only silence but the weight of what was denied. The Whitaker descendants' scars, their dreams, their uncanny births. Could these be less biological inheritance than psychological contagion? Trauma unaddressed becomes ritual, and ritual repeated in secret becomes indistinguishable from worship. In the 1980s, a Louisville family reported their daughter waking at night to hum an unrecognizable hymn. Recordings reveal the same melodic pattern described a century prior. When researchers traced the family's ancestry, they discovered a direct link. A maternal great-grandmother was a Whitaker. The past had not ended. It was only waiting for a voice to carry it forward. What does it mean? The head as window. In some traditions, the skull is not merely bone but vessel, a chalice of consciousness, a doorway for what lies beyond. Josiah may have believed Clara's severed head was not death but access, a threshold into a hymn that never ceased, a chorus that demanded audience. Perhaps the illusion was never his. Perhaps it is ours for believing death is silence. If you travel to Henderson County, avoid the river at dusk. Do not listen if you hear singing. Do not follow it into the water. Do not answer it if it echoes in your dreams, because the Whitaker illusion was never solved. It was never ended. It was only contained, within silence, within shadow, within the bloodlines of families who never speak of it. And if Josiah was right, if the head is the window, then perhaps Clara still waits, lips poised, hymn ready. And perhaps the next to hear it will be you.